So we're coming back in, this is class 7, cultural phases. This is our second part of class 7. We want to look now at a technical or a technology timeline. Now, there are so many things I didn't put on this timeline. I just put the major events for the past about 5 or so thousand years. I said 7 because when it says in this first point that you see on the screen, it says prehistory. How far back does that go? We don't know. I believe it's closer to 7,000, but I'm not sure how far back this would be. So the first thing that we would see in technology is fire. Man being able to make fire. This was a major turning point for man, to make and control fire. Once you do that, everything changes. You can create metal. The Iron Age can happen. You can melt the natural elements. You can cook food, which causes you not to be able to chew your food as much. I was just watching the craziest show about how we're the only species on the planet that cooks their food, and every other species has to just chew and chew like an ape that would have the same teeth structure as we have. I'm not talking about like a dog. I'm talking about like an ape. They spend 70% of their day chewing. Right? We don't. We just cook our food and we eat it, and the amount of protein we can intake, all of that. So cooking our food, having fire, having all that stuff, I believe that was from the beginning, but that is the beginning of technology. And then as we continue on, the next thing, this would be 3,000 years before Jesus. So 5,000 years from the modern time, 5,000 years ago, writing was first recorded. People had a written language. Now, my African tribes, you guys know, no written language. So even still today, 5,000 years later, no written language. Where were these written languages found? In Egypt and Mesopotamia. I only live at the moment, this would be the Africans that I work with and that we're among, we only live 800 miles from Egypt. And we're like, what? We still don't have a written language? How can that be? 5,000 years ago, we see the first human writings written down. Now, I don't personally believe that Adam had a written language. I don't even think that Noah might have had a written language. You know?
It doesn't look like it.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it. We don't know. So, at some point in time, man began to write and began to journal. Remember, Moses wrote the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Moses looked back thousands of years and said, this was Adam, this was Enoch, this was Noah, this is like the book of Job. Where did that come from? We don't know. We believe it's part of the Bible, but when did Job live? We don't know. So people went back in time. And then about 900 years before Jesus was born, gunpowder was discovered. 900, I'm sorry, after. Thank you so much for I was looking at that thinking, that's not right. 900 years AD, after the Bible was finished, the New Testament gospel went out, the apostles went out to fulfill the Great Commission. Hundreds of years, 800 years or so after the New Testament was completed, gunpowder was invented. When gunpowder was invented, it changed warfare forever, which then created countries, and those countries then created common languages with war and treaties and all of that. So gunpowder was terrible, but it was also good. It created more of a unity amongst the nation, or the peoples. And then normal printing. This would be a printing press. This would not be one monk copying a Bible, one Bible per year for one bishop to own and no one to have a common Bible. When the printing press started to become popularized, knowledge increased 50-fold, like overnight. Because before that, 1 or 2 people in an entire city might get an education outside of that city. And then they would have to come back and teach everybody. But everybody was illiterate, so they didn't really care about that kind of education. Once people learned to read and then had printed books in abundance, knowledge started to increase and the world started to develop. So now we're 1,000 years after Jesus. So we're about 5,000 years or so from the beginning of the wheel and fire and basic things like that up until the printing press. Then optical lenses started to be created. This would be people melting down sand to make glass and then polishing them in such a way that they can actually look through them. Because you can make glass all day long, but do you have the technology to actually polish that down and make it so it's not warped, but you can actually see through it, creating telescopes, creating, like when a pirate is on a ship or a captain and he breaks out his little, I don't even know what you call it. You guys know what I'm talking about? That little,
telescope.
It'd be a baby telescope, but it'd be more like a periscope or whatever. Periscope's meant for submarine. Either way, basic things like optics. Now, it was interesting, and I'm just skipping forward to Benjamin Franklin, right, which lived in the 1700s. He was the first one to create bifocal lenses. Benjamin Franklin had his eye doctor make him 2 different lenses, cut them in half, and glue them together. So the bottom half was for reading, the top half was for looking for distance. Benjamin Franklin invented his own bifocals. But even to have a pair of glasses was unheard of until 1300 AD. That means when you had bad eyesight, you had bad eyesight forever. Like when we go to Africa and we do these outreaches and we give people glasses and they put them on. I mean, we're talking about celebration and tears and hugging and screaming. They've never seen their entire life. They've never seen their kids' faces. They've never seen their spouses' faces. We give them these glasses, and we're the first people they see. Can you imagine what kind of screaming that would produce from an African to an American? Whoa! I've never seen anything like that. Then they'll go outside, and they're like, I've always seen the trees, and I knew they moved in the wind, and I heard it, but I'd never seen a leaf blowing. I just changed his life. Major things that we think are just totally common. Took thousands of years to develop eyeglasses. And then, just jumping ahead, steam engines. In the 1700s, steam engines were developed, and trains or locomotives were then becoming popular, which did what? Which moved mass goods across really difficult areas all the time because they wouldn't break down. They would constantly be moving. This is when Europe really started to develop, when the steam engine came out, and then a little later in the 1800s, they actually made steam engine cars. Once they were able to take those monstrous train engines and reduce them down to a smaller engine, and they made these steam engine cars, which were pretty much a joke, but they were a big deal back then. So, steam engines. So that's a brief history of 5,000 years. And look at the line of development. How high did it rise over 5,000 years?
Oh my goodness.
Just barely. That means people lived entire generations. And what the grandmother did, the grandchild did. And the great-grandchild, all the way throughout, thousands of years, not much change at all. At all. Just barely making these small developmental changes. And then right around 1820, now I'm rounding off these numbers so they're easy to understand. I took off like the 1803 and the 1512. I just made them 18 or 1830. In 1820, electricity was beginning to become harnessed, which means they were trying to somehow either create it or store it. And we know even today with batteries, that's even a newer technology. Benjamin Franklin in the 1700s, like all the other Europeans, were fascinated with the reality of electricity, but they couldn't do anything with it. 1820, electricity was being created through magnets and copper wires. Now, when I think about that, it's really hard to grapple with because magnets have been around since when? Since the days of Adam, prehistory. Copper has been around since prehistory, but to create a magnet that you can, make it in such a size and then wrap it with a copper wire and then put it in such a way that the inner copper and the outer copper and the inner magnets, the outer magnets start working against each other, and then when you spin it and you create your own electricity, you're thinking this has been a technology that could have worked 5,000 years ago, but nobody knew how to do it. And all of a sudden, science started to develop in such a way that they began to create electricity. And at this point, everything changed. At this point, it just went from leveled off to skyrocketing. When you go to a new country, if they don't have electricity, do not expect any development. I'll just say it that way. You might find a car, you might find a broken road, you might find a little this, a little that. If they don't have electricity, they will never get past day-to-day living. If I had electricity in the refugee camp, I could have pumped my water. Saves me hours a day, and I would have never had to have a back surgery because I wasn't pumping and carrying that water. I just flip on a switch. If I had electricity in the refugee camp that we were at, we would have had lights. We would have never been attacked by all these psycho rebels because we would have seen them coming. If we had electricity, we could have done anything. Medication. But because we didn't, medication, hospitals, freezers, all the advancements for the hospital that we needed were based on electricity. Did we have any? Absolutely not. Who can provide that? The government. Did our government care? No. So when the government cares, they give it to you. When the government doesn't care, they don't. Electricity is what makes or breaks all technology. All technology. So then, in the last 200 years, just get this, from 1820 to where we are today, 2015, right, 2016, in the last 200 years, our technology has just gone up so fast and so intense that people living a few hundred years ago would have said, that's never going to be possible. But to our kids that are born today, they're like, you didn't always have that? What does that mean? When I, from a space age culture, go into a other tribe, another phase of culture, they look at me and they think, that's not even possible. And I think, what do you mean it's not possible? I've been doing it since I was like, before I could remember. And they look at you like, no, that's not even possible. Why? Because my country had these things from the very beginning. And here's the interesting part about America, going back to godly governments. American government said, when somebody invents something, because we're individual, they can put a patent on that invention, which means they own it. The government doesn't steal it. Somebody else can't steal it. They own that invention. And so they protected the inventor through the patent system. Edison had, I think, 700 or 800 patents of his own, right? Not just the light bulb. He had all these patents. So he became a billionaire because of his patents. And all of these guys in the early days that were discovering these things and developing them things, the American government says, we will protect you and give you a place to develop that. That's what made or broke, I believe, this kind of level of technology. Patents allowed common people to move freely. China, never. Communist countries, no way. Why is it that one of the greatest nations on earth, China, has never gone beyond just barely surviving, except in this more modern last 20, 30, 40 years? Because communism just suppressed them, held them down. The Chinese are brilliant, but they're not given the opportunity to be individuals, to make that brilliance available to all people. The government became jealous and suppressed them. All right, so now let's begin to start climbing up. From electricity, the next thing we had in 1875, so you see there's like a 30, 40, 50 year window there. 1875, telephones were created. Who? Alexander Graham Bell. A brilliant man. The only thing he discovered is that when you take a magnet and you put a coil inside that magnet and you put a piece of paper on it and you speak into that magnet, it pushes the coil, which creates a little bit of electricity. You send it down a wire to another coil on another magnet that then does the same thing on the other side. That's what the microphone's doing with the speakers in the room. I'm using his technology as I'm talking to you right now. I speak into a coil, it sends electricity, and it produces it at a higher level. That's it. The simplest technology in the world. 1875, people could begin communicating. Imagine how the world opened up. You can pick up the phone, you can talk from New York to LA. I mean, they didn't have wires that long at that moment, but those things happened very, very quickly. Then, from that point, electricity started to become mass-produced because Edison made a light bulb. When Edison finally figured out how to take a copper filament and create light from it, then he said, everybody's going to want this, so I'm going to make the power that they need to want my light bulb. You see, Edison was an inventor in all right. So as he's creating the light bulb, he creates power plants to charge or to fund the light bulb or to empower it, to do what it's going to do. And so from Manhattan, from the island in New York, those first power plants were developed and then they spread across the entire nation and then finally, of course, into Europe and the rest of the world. So electricity, in a sense, started where? In New York City. Wow. Telephone started in New York. Electricity started in New York. Remember, these guys all lived around the same time. As that's going on, you get to about 1895, and what do we find? The radio. Now we don't even need wires. And one person, like the president or whoever, can get on the radio and say to the whole nation, this is what we're doing, this is what's going on. We didn't have to wait weeks to find out what was going on. We could hear about it right then. It changed our culture totally. Mass information going out. Music, stories, literacy. It was amazing. Then, right around the turn of the 2000th century, the 20th century, the discovery of oil to be converted into gasoline changed us forever. Now we could have cars. We could have internal combustion engines. You guys might think that we've always had cars. It's only been about 100 years that we've had cars. What would your life be like without a car? You ever watched the Waltons? Or I should say, before the Waltons?
Yeah.
You ever watched Little House on the Prairie? Watch Little House on the Prairie, and you know what that is? That's a sanctified version of the refugee camp that I lived in. Right? And I was like, wow, that's what they would be like if they all loved the Lord, but horses and buggies and like, what? Get out of here. Just give me a car. Just give me a motor. Give me an engine. 1900, gasoline was modified or worked until it could be used in a vehicle. And then, you remember our boys, the Wright brothers? It was actually 1903. 1903, the Wright brothers flew, I think it was 220 feet in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, on the sand with a motorized plane. Not a glider, because they've had gliders for many years. The Chinese had gliders 3,000 years ago. This was a motorized plane because why? They had electricity to make the motor. They had gasoline to run the motor. And they had two brilliant bicycle mechanics to create the first airplane ever to be flown. And I just watched a great show on it. I'll tell you about that in a minute. I'll show you where it's at if you want to research that more. So aircraft started in 1905. By 1910, Henry Ford got the idea that he can mass produce cars. Cars have been around for a little bit, 30 or 40 years, but only for the highest in the society, the elite, because nobody could afford them. So Henry Ford says, why don't we create, now that we have electricity and machines and all of that and rubber and all of those kinds of things with the oil and everything else, why don't we create an assembly line and be able to mass produce these? And then because he was a brilliant economist, not just a great engineer, a brilliant economist, he said, I'm going to pay the guys that work for me, which is hundreds and hundreds of people, enough money that in 5 years they can buy one of these cars. Okay, that's where it all changed for America. Henry Ford paid his people like 20 times what everybody else would pay him because he knew if nobody could buy his cars, nobody would buy his cars. So he said, I'm going to invest all the money that I have into this company, pay my people $5 an hour in those days, like $100 an hour today, so all of them could then go to the bank and get a loan and buy a car. Before you know it, hundreds of people in New York have a car. Now you got to keep up with the Joneses, don't you? Everybody needs to have a car. Henry Ford went from, and this is the statistic, it was amazing, in 1910, he had started his manufacturing plant. By 1915, he had made 250,000 vehicles. 250,000 in 5 years. Nobody owned a car. What happened? Boom, there was this explosion of technology. By the 8th year, he went from that car at half price, because now he made so much and he could produce them so much faster. It cost half the price. By the 8th year of his production, he had created 500,000 vehicles. 500,000 vehicles. That was what? That would be 1918. Yeah. So from 1910 to 1920, just to round it off, 500,000 cars were on the road. And he was only one of them. He was just the big one that we all remember.
And how many roads?
How many roads? A lot of roads, because the American government was into it. So here's the deal. 5 years ago, I'm living in a refugee camp, let's say. I'm the only guy with a car. 10,000 people. I'm the only person with a car. 10,000 people. How can that be? How can that be? Why? Because I'm used to the American level of technology and growth and development and all of the things that went around that. Unbelievable amounts of things. So then, from there, television. 1925 was the first TV. Who was it created by? A little farmer boy in Idaho. Right? It wasn't RCA. RCA took what the farmer boy did and made it big. But a farmer boy that nobody even knows, I can't remember his name, I was studying it last night, just escapes my mind. This little farmer boy in the middle of Ohio says, if a radio can work, a television can work, and he does it in his barn, of all things. This is the kind of American ingenuity that I'm talking about. It's amazing, amazing stuff. So now everybody can see what's going on all around the world. Now the screen of that first TV was about as big as an iPad. Okay? And that was it. That was it. It was about as big as an iPad. It was all grainy and stuff. From there, by 1969, now I jumped over a whole bunch of technology because we don't have the time to cover it all. By 1969, what did we have? The first rocket that went into space. Why? Because at the end of World War II, there was a German scientist that was making rockets for Hitler. Hitler wasn't able to use them as he wanted to. So when the war ended, the Americans and the Russians were racing to that part of Germany to get the plans for the rocket, and the scientist and his team that created the rocket, they brought him back to America. But because he was a German, nobody wanted to give him a try, because remember, we just fought a war and all those people died. So they're like, we're not going to put a German on our military staff, because NASA is really military with a secular name put on it. It's all that is. So they let him sit. They actually kept him on ice for like 5 years. And all these Americans tried to do it. And the rockets would go up and explode and come back down. And finally they said, okay, bring in the German genius. And he did. And then he made the first rocket to go into outer space and to put up something. As that's going on, the Russians are doing the same thing. They launched the first satellite. You guys remember Sputnik? Okay. First satellite. By who? By the brilliant Russian scientists that got the plans from the Germans. But we got the plans and the German, right? So they got up, and then when that guy that built that tried to do more, tried to make it like a nuclear bomb and all, he ended up dying. He got sick, he died, and the whole Russian thing collapsed, and then we released our German, and then we made it to the moon. So it was this huge struggle between the Americans and the Russians over German technology. It's really what it was. And so then we put a man on the moon. I mean, come on. Is it for real? 1903, the Wright brothers fly a few hundred feet. By 1969, somebody's on the moon. That's just absurd. Think about that kind of technology. Just 7,000 years, it's like flatline, and then all of a sudden it goes. See why I call it space age? That's exactly why. 1985, the personal computer is invented. Who is the mastermind behind that? Bill Gates. Now, the government's had computers since the 60s, and huge businesses and Wall Street, but nobody else could afford it. Bill Gates says we can do this small. And so he and Steve Jobs are doing what? They're in a competition, which creates, right, good things. Competition creates success. So Steve and Bill are in a competition, and the first personal computer is created and given, in a sense, to the people. Right about that time, you could get primitive internet. Primitive internet. It was like really bad. Slow. By 1990, you could get dial-up. You guys remember dial-up? Who can remember dial-up in the room?
I don't.
You remember the noise? If you listened long enough, you could actually hear the language. Oh, that means it's talking to the server. Oh, it's pinging back from the server. Oh, it's connected. Oh, hey, I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
You have? I did.
I did.
didn't know about it.
Between the time you started up your computer and you went online, 15 minutes before you could send an email, a text email, no photos, no attachments, just hello, how are you doing? Took forever. Unbelievable. Slow internet.
We still have these in Brazil.
Yeah. You still have certain parts of the country still have them. Now, by 1995, you could actually own a cell phone.
Oh, big deal.
The first cell phone I ever saw was in 1991, and it was a suitcase. Literally, a guy had a big old pack, and it was a battery and this big thing, and it had a headset with a cord. And I'm standing in line, and it had an antenna. And I looked at the guy like, dude, this isn't like the Vietnam War. What are you doing with that thing on your body? And we're standing in line to sign up for college at Fullerton College, right? And he goes, well, I'm a realtor and I need to update my realty license. And so if I get a call and I miss the sale of a house, I need to be able to make sure I get that call. And I'm like, what's it cost? He goes, it's like $5 a minute and $500 a month just to have. And then he would pick it up and he would put it down. And it only lasted like an hour. We're talking like a suitcase, a briefcase. By 1995, that was 1991, by the way, just to date myself. By 1995, you could get, you remember? The sweet flip phones, the clamshells. Oh, they were so awesome. They had 9 buttons on them, and you could say, hi, I'll be late. Okay, I'll see you later. That was it. That's all you could do. Somewhere in between there were pagers. You guys remember pagers? What was the purpose of a pager? It would go off. You would pull over because you didn't have a cell phone. You'd find some kind of a pay phone. You would call, put coins in. You would call. You couldn't hear, and then the people wouldn't be there. You'd hang up. You get back on the freeway and you get another page. I didn't even put pagers in. I just gave that to you for fun. Yeah. Then they went to text paging. Yeah, that was a whole other deal. So then, where do we find ourselves? 1998, high-speed internet. Right now at my house, I get 200 megabytes per second.
It's too much.
200 megabytes per second. Every person in my family has an iPad, a mini, right, or a big one, and an iPhone or an iPod Touch. All my kids, my wife and I, we can all be watching Netflix in 5 different rooms, streaming perfectly. No one even knows. No one even knows. You can be on the phone, you can be FaceTime, you could be whatever. I mean, we're talking like, if I was to do the noise of that, I'd break the speakers. I won't even try. 1998. And then here we go. By the year 2005, Steve Jobs from Apple made the announcement, here it is. Here it is, the iPhone. What was it? A computer in your pocket. It wasn't texting. It wasn't calling. It wasn't just this or just that. It was a phone. It was web. It was Wi-Fi. It was everything. It was Google. And then he said, right now we have about 100 apps or programs at the moment since he put that out. What was that? 2005? It's now. So in the last 10 years, how many apps are on the App Store? 200,000. Why? Because it was released that the whole world could make programs to go on this supercomputer that's in your pocket. Anything you want to do, there's an app for it. Now, in my generation today, I should say that in my mind, maybe not everybody that's old as I am, which is 45, in my mind, I get a new app every week. Oh, do I need to do that? Well, there's probably an app for it. Well, there's another app for it. There's another app for that. I've got so many apps on my phone, I got to clean them out because I'd have too many to even keep track of, right? My kids were like, Dad, you didn't always have iPhones? Absolutely not.
I still don't have one.
Absolutely. You don't have one?
Oh, no.
Oh, I'm buying you one.
No,
By the end of this message, I'm buying you an iPhone.
6 plus and I don't want it. No.
Yeah, here's why. By this time, Google is invented, 1998, and the world is now available to us.
Yep.
Google is invented, the iPhone, you can see it, right? Wi-Fi comes online, which changes everything. Now you're not connected to a plug that you're waiting for it just to connect. Now you can just go into a room and boom, you're up and running. That was the year 2000. Just think of these numbers. The year 2000, Wi-Fi comes on. Wikipedia, 2001. Whoa. You mean like there's this monstrous encyclopedia where I don't have to buy 50 books anymore that are out of date within like a week? Now I can just go online and I can start getting that stuff. Skype, 2003. I can see my loved ones 10,000 miles away. Now, it didn't work that good in the beginning, but whatever does. It was bleepy, it would crash, it would cut in and cut out, but I could see my loved ones 10,000 miles away from my phone. That was a miracle. Then, 2004, now think about it, this is 2000, 2001, 2003, 2004, Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
How many people are on Facebook right now? 1 billion people.
We had Orkut before Facebook.
Yeah, but let's just,
The old people.
Yeah, old people, yeah.
The Orkut. We had the Orkut before Facebook. You don't even know about it. See? You're going to be a missionary. You need to know those things.
So let me just, before we get distracted on that, let's come back. Facebook. 1 billion people are on Facebook today.
Yeah.
1 billion people. I'm going to talk about that in a minute when I talk about technology and how that changes missions. 2005, I haven't even put on Craigslist because that's a local thing. Right, Facebook is international in that sense. Craigslist is local, but it's still huge. Then, by 2005, YouTube. YouTube is totally universal. We're watching Muslim terrorists do things in a war zone almost live. How in the world is that possible? That's brand new. Those things were not available 5 years ago. Now, I've got this personal computer in my pocket. It's a phone, it's a text messaging machine, it's got Wi-Fi, it's got FaceTime, it's got my TV remote on it, and my new one, I got a 6 or whatever they are, it shoots 4K video. What's called 4K video? It makes high-def video, which was the coolest thing 3 years ago, look like nothing. It looks like nothing, it's 4K. The next one's gonna have 8K. What's 8K? I don't even know, it's so monstrous and so big. The technology's like you can't buy the TV soon enough to play the phone that you just bought because the technology's constantly increasing. Totally crazy. My daughter was just telling me, her friend was over this weekend at the house. They took like 150 photos on one phone, 150 photos on the other. How many photos do you guys have of yourself when you were kids? I have 1 per year.
I don't even find mine.
Here's Rob when he was 1. Here's Rob when he was 3. Here's Rob when he was 5. That's it. I got 1 photo every couple years. My daughter can take 50 photos a day. Now that's just one of my daughters. Then I have my son and my other daughter. How many photos do I have in my iPhoto library? 15,000, and I'm throwing them out constantly. I have 15,000. Just the absurd amount of things. Now, the question I have as we're looking at this, are Americans superior to anybody else?
No.
No,
Absolutely.
absolutely not. We've just been born in the land of the opportunity. We are not smarter. We are not better. We've just been given opportunity, and I believe it's because of the gospel in men and women, and it has come through our culture. We are not different. Our government has just given us the ability to see these things. If you want to learn more about that, there is a new Netflix series called American Genius. And they're not building up America at all. They're just saying all these things happened, and most of them happened in Manhattan. All of these things happened right here. So this is a picture of Thomas Edison right when he turned on that first light bulb. And you're like, wow, that's the beginning of the technical revolution. Now, the modern world. What does the modern world look like today? What does the modern world look like today? Let's just go back to 1960. In 1960, a government would have rooms of computers and staff, not a staff member, but staff to run these computers. And what could they store?
Few things.
Like 20 megabytes.
Yeah.
Like 20 megabytes. What is that? Yeah, that's like one contact or one photo. They could store one normal digital photo. They didn't have digital cameras back then, but the size of a digital photo today, it took rooms of computers and millions of dollars of installation and upkeep. Then, remember the days of 1990 when I was going off to Bible college and my father-in-law bought my wife the newest Mac computer out? It had like 5 or 10 megabytes of total memory. It cost hundreds of dollars, and all it could do was type. It was just a glorified typewriter. That's all it was. It was a typewriter with a screen and a little floppy disk in there. The iPhone is 800 times faster. 800 times faster. And how big is my iPhone? 250 gigabytes. We didn't even talk gigabytes back in those days. We talked megabytes. I couldn't even put the number of how much bigger it is. 800 times faster. And where does it fit? In my pocket. In my pocket. All day, every day. This is what I would say to people about the iPhone. If I own this, I can rule the world. That's it. If I own it, I can rule the world. If I lose it, I'm nothing.
You're lost. Exactly.
Without my iPhone, what am I?
Lost.
I'm nothing. I'm exaggerating. You guys understand that. I'm speaking to the newer generation. There was a time when I was in southern China working with the underground church. I got a text message from James Nika in Kenya. He came out of Sudan into Kenya because they have a little bit of cell signal. I had given him an iPhone recently, an old iPhone that I had. I gave it to him. We unlocked it. On his iPhone, he texted me. So I immediately called him back, or I texted him back and said, can I call you? And he said, yes. So he put on his little headset, I put on my headset, and we FaceTimed audio, which means we were using the internet. Because to make a phone call was impossible from southern China, working in an underground situation halfway across the world. But I could use FaceTime through the internet. I get on the phone with James. He explains to me what's happening in the war, what's going on. There needs to be massive prayer requests. So we pray together. We talked for like an hour. We prayed together. It was a miracle. I'm thinking, I don't even know what city I'm in. I have no idea where he is. And it's like he's right next door to me. Just think about technology and ministry. I hang out with him after praying with him. And I immediately popped onto what? Facebook. And I posted, please pray for our people in Africa. This is what's going on. Hundreds of people are commenting and liking and praying. Then I send an email to the home church with a photo attached that I got off the internet about something that was going on. I sent a photo, and our prayer people at home sent it out to thousands of people through email. So there I am with one device in the middle of nowhere, communicating with Africa, communicating with America, and ministry was changed forever. That was just one little moment. So do I love technology? Absolutely. Would Paul utilize it? Absolutely. Can you imagine what Paul the Apostle would have done with technology? It's absurd. It's totally absurd. And then we raised money for the crisis and all that stuff from that one phone call. Now, what's the world going to look like in the future? Electric cars. We're going to be off the grid. We're going to charge our cars through solar. I cannot wait for this day to come. Right now, these cars are 5 times more than I can pay for a car, but the price is coming down. This is a new technology. Tesla, the car manufacturer, is also making a whole house battery, which means we're going to be off the grid totally. Solar panels on your house are going to charge a battery big enough to run your entire house. When you sit in one of these new cars like a Tesla, you sit in it and you think, what is this? This is just like one monstrous iPad and another monstrous iPad in this car that's totally silent, and it is the fastest car on the road. And when you're a speed freak like me, oh man, it's not just awesome, it drives like a race car, it handles like a dream. It doesn't cost me any money to repair. Why? Because when you remove the internal combustion engine, you're losing 5,000 moving parts that are potentially going to break. 5,000 moving parts are removed from a gasoline or diesel engine, and you put in an electric motor and a battery, and what do you have? 2 or 3 things that might break, but they're under warranty. I'm so excited, I can't even tell you. Can't even tell you. What is Google producing? What is Google producing right now? The self-driving car. Now, out of the thousands that are on the road, one of them bumped into a bus, like last week, at 2 miles an hour. No one was hurt. And everybody's like, oh, it's not going to work. I'm thinking, are you serious? When the Wright brothers were first showing their airplane to the U.S. military, they were dying in crash landings. The military was dying. The Wright brother, one of the Orville or whatever, he broke all of his leg bones. I mean, that's how technology starts. This Google car, it bumps into a bus. That's it. No fatalities, no issues. It's a self-driving car. Unbelievable. This is where our life is going, and the rest of the world, or majority of it, hasn't even got to the car yet. So there now we have the Apple Watch. Now I think the Apple Watch still needs a lot of advancement, but what is it doing? It's tracking all of your movement of the day. It's helping you with your health. It's not only giving you the basic apps, email, internet, all that stuff, it's giving you thousands of other apps. You can look at your photos, you can watch video, you can FaceTime, you can do whatever you want on your watch.
You can check your email.
You can do anything you want. You can talk to it, it can talk to you. Now it's slowly coming on, but this is what it's going to be like. And also it's a watch as well. It can tell you the time. What's it going to look like in the future? No idea. No idea, but I'm imagining something really fun like a wraparound bracelet, right, that is a watch, and then you peel it off, and it is a phone if you want to do that, or you stretch it and it's an iPad. I have no idea, but let me tell you this.
Jesus will be back by that time.
It's unlimited. It's unlimited. But here's the point. This is why I'm bringing all this up in a missions class. This is the world that we're used to. This is what we're used to. All of us constantly are saying, oh great, I hope Apple comes out with the wristband, watch, iPad, all in one. Yeah, maybe by the time my daughter gets married and has a grandchild, I'll be able to get that. I mean, we're talking about, it's coming. It's almost here. Now, another thing about the amount of money we have, the kind of things we do for recreation, it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, my friend's got a race bike. He goes, Rob, you want to borrow my race bike? And so I did in high school. I got up to 150 miles an hour on the freeway. I wasn't saved. I broke every law in the book. 150 miles an hour on what? On my 18-year-old friend's toy. How many people in the world can even say that they could have that opportunity once in their life? Would they even have a road that could handle that, let alone a motorcycle for a high schooler? Totally insane. And then this motorcycle I just totaled about 3-4 months ago. My brother-in-law bought it, never drove it, parked at my garage. I could ride it whenever I want. It's a classic Harley. What is that about? I make like this much money, but the people around me make this much money, and so my life is unlimited. The point is, we do this for fun. We don't even have to do this. We're so wealthy, and our culture is so intense, we do it for fun. So here we are, cultural phases. Are we space age? Absolutely. Is God going to call us to all of the phases all the way down to the Stone Age? Yes, that's what we want to be ready for. Where do I belong? Where do I fit? So let's just look quickly at a few of the cultural phases. Now I put down 8. Now these 8 are just the most basic way to look at this teaching today. You could read books and get great articles that go a lot more in depth, but just for an example, 8 levels. Number 1 being space age, number 8 being Stone Age. What does it look like when East meets West? In these 4 phases, the first one is going to be somebody that's born in phase 1 in a space age culture, Europe, Japan, America, Australia, one of these more developed areas. And in that area, they are highly educated. They have large cities that are extremely fast-paced, and they enjoy change. This is the key. They enjoy change. When you're doing ministry amongst these people, you don't have to learn that much at all, do you? You might just need to learn a little bit of dialogue if you're ministering to another subculture, but there's not much of a learning curve in these areas where they're totally Western. This would be, like we said, North America, Europe, and Australia. This is where you are the majority. You are the majority, and anybody you're ministering to is trying to, in some way, become like you. So you don't have to change to become like them. They're changing to become like you. Therefore, this is the easiest place to minister. Have you ever wondered why the Great Commission has never been fulfilled? And why everybody says, oh, I'm just going to go 2 blocks down the street and plant another church. Well, isn't there already a church there? Yeah, but it's not the best kind of church. So I'm going to bring another flavor to church a mile from here or 10 miles from here. What are you talking about? You're talking about ministering amongst yourselves in these places that are totally easy. People enjoy change in this culture, in this society. Now, in phase 2, these would be people that are born there. You're working amongst indigenous people of your own kind. They're still in the Western world. They have a medium education. This would be a lot more of like a farming community where they're definitely educated. They understand the big picture, but they're not striving to know more. They're striving just to live. This would be the Midwest and that farming community. They normally have a lot smaller towns, and you can go into culture shock as an American when you go into a small town. You think there's only 5,000 people in this town? Are you serious? I had half that amount in my high school, my college. That can't be for real. In these areas, people are slow-paced. And what are they for change? They're skeptical of change. Skeptical. Now, I'm not talking about becoming advanced technologically. I'm talking about new ideas about the Lord, about really teaching the gospel and about bringing people into a new understanding of Him. Even though they're your own people, they're still in a slower-paced life, and they're skeptical of change. It will take a lot longer. Remember we talked about how long will it take to be productive? It will take a lot longer in one of these societies. Then, in stage 3, in the Western world, you're ministering to people that are coming from foreign lands into your world. Think of your neighbor that is cross-cultural, that was born and raised in Asia or in Africa or in some other area. And you're in there, they're in your world now, and they're learning your language. So what is happening? They're, in a sense, becoming like you as they're learning your language. This would be the younger generation. This could be large or small town. These people are more open to change, these immigrants coming in, than the people were in the farmlands. They're more open to change. Why? Because they came to America to find a better life. The people in the farmlands or in those areas that aren't big and aren't developed, they don't want to change because they're satisfied. And praise the Lord, they're probably more godly in a sense than the more modern culture. But the people that are coming into America as foreigners are learning your language, living in your towns, and they want to be discipled. They want to change, and you'll see the eagerness in their hearts as a missionary. And then phase 4, you have the foreigners that come here and do not learn English whatsoever. They do not learn English. What are they normally? The older generation. You've met the Mexican-American family where the children are born here. They speak perfect Spanish. They speak perfect English. They can get on the phone and speak Spanish and you have no idea that they weren't in Mexico. They get on the phone and speak English and you think that they're European colored. They're not. They're Mexican-Americans that are totally bicultural. But then you go home and their dad struggles with Spanish. But does grandma speak any Spanish at all? No. I'm sorry, any English at all? Thank you. Only Spanish. And so you have these people that have come to our culture, but they're older and they don't want to change. Talk about discipleship and bringing the gospel to them. They're like, no, I've always had a cross. I've always gone to a Catholic church. I've always done these series of prayers. Why would I need this born-again Jesus that you talk about? That sounds a little cultic. Where the younger generation is saying, we want to study the Bible. We want to see it. The older generation says, we don't want to. We're just looking at people now that are in the West. Now, once you move from the West to the East, now you're in their world. You're in their country. This would be Asia, China, India, Africa, the whole continent. You're the minority. They are the majority. When you were in America, you might have to flex a little bit. But once you go out of the States or out of the Western world, now you've got to make major changes in your life. You are the one that needs to change. You are in their world. The obligation to fit in is on you. Remember, you cannot fight culture. We talked about that. You cannot fight culture. When you go to these countries, if they do it, do it. If they don't do it, don't do it. That's just all there is to it. You can't fight it. The further you go from home, the longer it's going to take to adapt. The further you go from home, the longer it's going to take to adapt. Now, moving into what we're going to call phase 5. Phase 5 is a Westerner living in an Eastern culture. In phase 5, you will find people that speak perfect English. They're highly educated, normally living in a large city in a fast-paced environment. And what do they like? They enjoy change. They'll find you in a crowd and say, are you new to this place? They'll meet you in a church or in a business, and they'll just immediately engage with you in your language. And you'll think, wow, I didn't even have to do anything. There was like this invisible bridge between me and the guy that speaks English, between me and the woman that speaks English. There's this bridge, and I can walk across it to his world. He can walk across it to my world, and I like change, and he likes change, and you know what? We immediately become friends. These are the kind of people that I believe are going to change the unreached. These are the kind of people that have from that world, these would be the nationals we would call them, they're from that world, they can cross into my world. I absolutely have to cross into their world, but we enjoy learning from one another. They're open, I'm open, we're working together, enjoying change. An invisible bridge between the East and West happens in phase 5. Then you get to phase 6. And in phase 6, there's people that may be learning English, maybe they're not learning English. They have a little bit. Their education is limited. They could be from a large city with limited education or a very small city, and everything you say and do in their culture, they're going to be skeptic of it. They're going to say, I don't know, well, I'm not sure about that. You know what they're going to do? They're going to watch you closely for years before they'll open up their ears and their heart and listen to you. We say with these people, there's no bridge. You just have to take a huge running leap and jump over the chasm. You've got to get to their world, and they got to see that you're making an effort to get into their world. They don't speak your language, you've got to speak their language. This is where the time commitment really starts to matter. They're skeptical until they see you make a major effort to move into their world. And then in phase 7, no English is spoken at all. At all. So there's no common language between you and them. There is very little education. They're normally from small towns or even villages. That's why there's so little education. The government doesn't educate everybody, so therefore whole parts of their society remain limited. They're coming from a very slow-paced environment, extremely slow-paced. These would be people like Central America. You can go down and find a farmer. He might have electricity. He might have a tractor. But you know what? He doesn't care at all about the modern thought and the modern world. He just wants to feed his kids. He just wants to work his land, slow-paced. He loves it. What does he do? He rejects change. He rejects change. In this one, there is no bridge. This one, you've got to take a running jump and a springboard and get over a wall. What's that wall? The wall says, I'm fine the way I am. I don't even want to know about you. So this isn't just jumping over a chasm like it was between 5 and 7. This is getting to where you're going to actually scale up a wall and get into their world, rejecting change altogether. And then in phase 8, and remember, we're just briefly touching this. In phase 8, there is absolutely no language whatsoever spoken that you understand. No language that you understand at all. Very little education, if any. What does that mean? Their minds are so limited that whatever you say is foreign, and they're going to reject you wholeheartedly until you've proven your love to them. Totally remote villages, up the Amazon River for Vera here. Extremely slow-paced. So slow-paced that a tropic environment to them is just all they know. Hostile to change. These people, change? Why would I want to change? If it was good for my grandfather, it's good for me. Did Thomas Edison say, if it was good for my grandfather, it was good for me? Mm-hmm. Did Orville Wright say that? Absolutely not. Did any of those people that we love and revere in America, we would say, it was good enough for my grandfather, I need to do 10 times better. That's the way we do it. Here, at this point, for the Westerner, you got to climb Mount Everest without a rope to get into their culture. This is where nationals cross this bridge way more than we ever could. Now, I'm not saying that God never sends a Westerner to work amongst the people that are in these Stone Age cultures. He does. Normally, it's the pioneer missionary. We're going to talk about that in our last class. We're going to give a whole example of that. Normally, a pioneer missionary plants the gospel 20 years, 30 years. He buries his wife and his kids along the way. He plants that work. Nationals understand it, then they take it to all the other villages. So God will use a Westerner in the beginning, but then the Westerner, I believe, needs to step back and train the nationals to take this gospel to a whole new level. So just a few questions. What breaks down every wall? What breaks down every wall? Love. When we first opened up our medical clinic in South Sudan, a young doctor in his residency or in his medical school residency time, he spent, I think, 8 weeks in this area of South Sudan. We didn't speak their language. They didn't speak our language. But you know what we spoke? Love. This lady's looking at this doctor saying, who are you and why would you come to my country? This is the same tribe 10 years ago that I was able to preach the gospel at recently. And they said, you've loved us all this time. Now we're willing to listen. It started with an American doctor just loving them. When you suffer with them and you show them that you love them, they will open their hearts to you. What is our goal? To raise up nationals. Because there's so many phases of culture. There's so many complexities within culture. We find that bridge. We find those key people. We pour into them. God does a work in their heart. And then they go out and they take it to a new level. Now let's just remind ourselves. 8 categories of worldview that determine how much time it takes to become successful. How much time you must invest. The further you go from home, the more time it takes. The further you go from home, the more training you'll need. Is there a language barrier? Let's think of this. There's only 5 major languages in the world. The first one is English. 400 million people today are born in an English-speaking country. That's 26% of the world. 400 million. No, I'm sorry. That's a fraction of that. 2 billion people, actually 23% of the world, speak English, but as a second language. So the question is it their heart language or is it their business language? It's hard to disciple somebody in their business language. What's that mean? If I learn to speak Japanese and somebody preaches the gospel to me in Japanese, I got to filter it all through my mind to get it to my heart language, which is English. But when I hear it in my own language, it makes sense. So the first language in the world is English. Praise the Lord that God allowed us to speak that from birth, in a sense, if you were born and raised here. The next major language is Mandarin Chinese. Mandarin Chinese. 850 million people are born speaking it, and 1 billion people total have learned it for business. Then there's Spanish. Spanish is the next one. It's number 3 on the list. 400 million people today speak Spanish as their first language. If you speak Spanish and you speak English, you can minister to over half of the world at the moment. Half the world at the moment. Spanish and English alone. Then there's Hindi. Hindi is the next one. 325 million people speak Hindi as their heart language. That would be mostly India. And then there's the Arab areas, which would be not Islamic. Thank you so much, Amal. They speak Islamic. They speak Arabic. You can tell it's the end of the class. They speak Arabic. So between the 5, English, Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, Hindi, and Arabic, you can speak to almost every person alive today. Now remember we talked about, we watched the video Lost in Translation, right? Just remember the video, how funny that was. That's what missionaries do. That's what missionaries do. Your actions speak louder than your words. Only 10% of what you say is actually heard. 90% is based on what you do when you're saying it. Your actions speak louder than your words. There are 3 forms of communication. The first form is your actual words. These would be, I love you. Jesus came to die for you. That would just be the language part of it. That's the very beginning. And even in that, there can be massive frustration. I can remember being in Africa, and I would say to an African lady, where's the trash can? Because I didn't want to litter. Littering is legal in Africa. I didn't want to litter. And so the lady said to me, what's a trash can? I'm all, where can I throw this? So she points at this metal thing. So I throw it away. As I walk out, I hear the British guy say, those Americans are so rude. Weird. And I'm thinking, why am I rude? I don't want to litter. And he goes, it's a rubbish bin. It's not a trash can. I'm like, oh, sorry. Right? I speak English. He speaks English. He's mad at me. You ever gone into a British setting and asked them where the bathroom is? And they show you the bathtub? And you say, no, I mean the restroom. And they show you the bed? And you're all, no. And then they say, oh, you want to go to the toilet. And you're all, toilet? Why would you even use that word? That's terrible. We call it a bathroom, a restroom, a washroom, or something else, but not a toilet. And that's English to English, Western to Western. Then you have situations like your tone of voice. Tone of voice is so major in every culture. In America, or let's just say California, you can say, dude, right? And you guys understand what I'm talking about. Well,
husband, wife?
yeah.
I forgot to say.
Yeah, I mean, all day long.
Honey.
I know a guy that can say dude in 50 different inflections, and I know every part of it. Long story, I won't even go into it. We're in a Bible college, and these Koreans are speaking English in our Calvary Chapel Bible College. It's up in Twin Peaks. And when they would run out of towels in the bathroom, I'd be working in the kitchen, they would come into the kitchen, they would say, "No towel! No towel!" And they would yell at me. I was like,
He's mad.
okay. And I'd get the towels. So I'm in a staff meeting about 2 weeks later. And the director of the Bible college, brilliant theologian, brilliant man. He goes, "Those guys are so rude. They told me the other day, no towel." And I'm all, yeah, they told me the same thing too.
It's not rude.
We were so offended as the whole staff by these Koreans because of the tone of voice they use speaking our language. We canceled their contract, which is illegal, and we threw them out. We said, "You guys are rude. You're not even, example of the Spirit of the Lord, and you don't have love." We threw them out and said, "Never come back."
Oh my
Why? Because of a cross-cultural misunderstanding. We were never trained. They weren't trained. That was tone of voice. Then you have body language.
Oh my, that's
Body language. We threw them out. They never came back. It was horrible. It was a terrible thing for the church.
Yeah, it is.
Huh?
Can you go to Korea?
No, I can't go to Korea. No way. They'll throw me out. So then there's body language. 50% of what we do is our body language. I told you the story about when I was teaching with my hands in my pockets, and they thought I was so prideful. They said, "We can never hear another message from you." I didn't know that this said, "I'm prideful and I think I'm better than you." But of course, I'm the white American. Put my hands in my pockets, they think I'm prideful. Filipino pastor, this would be coming to America, is working with Jeff Jackson, one of our guest speakers. As the Filipino pastor is working in the rest home with the people in the old folks' home, and he's singing to them hymns. In his culture, I'm not sure what island he's from, what culture he has. In his culture, when people cry, it's a sign of shame. And so he would laugh at them to cover their shame. So as these Americans are crying, as the Filipino pastor is playing his guitar and singing to them, they would start crying. So he would go up in their face and go, "Ha, ha, 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 ha," and he would laugh right in their face. And the American pastor is so offended that's working with them, they go back to Jeff Jackson's church, and the American guy goes, "Jeff, I can't work with Filipino pastor because he laughs at those people." And Jeff says, "Hold on here. Let's ask him why he does it." He goes, "I did it because that's love." And the American's like, "That's not love," right? They weren't using words, they were using body language. Very, very, very important. We need to be very careful of these things. What you say is 10%. What you do is the other 90%. Now, we talked about when we looked at different things of in Egypt, in Italy. Then we talked about in Greece, and then finally in America. Where's the money? Let me just share with you one final story. When the American government delegates were working with Saddam Hussein, this is just before the Desert Storm War. This is back in 1990 or whenever it was. The Desert Storm War. When the Americans were sitting in the room and Saddam Hussein came in, the Americans were sitting with their legs crossed and their shoe was visible to Saddam Hussein. In his culture, when you see the bottom of somebody's shoe, it's like spitting in their face. So there's these American ambassadors sitting there, and just the way that they were sitting with their foot up, Saddam walked in, looked at it, and walked out and said to his people, "Let's go to war right now." We're talking, they're ready to go to war over a cultural offense. Nobody said anything. It was simply body language. It was the way that we present ourselves. So as we looked at before, the way religions, are they binding, are they freeing, are they, is the economic system of the country, does it set people free, does the government care about the people? So many things go on and that are involved in that. So I'm going to skip ahead just to bring us to the end. Next week we have Easter break. We are not in class. Do not come to class. Spend time with your family. When we come back from Easter break in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about culture shock. And you're going to absolutely love it. We're going to do culture shock, and we're going to record it so you're not going to miss it. It's going to be great. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for just these brief moments to consider so many things in this world that you've called us to, in the people that you've called us to. Lord, open our minds that we may see past what the outward is saying. And Lord, speak to us, show us, Lord, what's happening in the heart. Give us advisors, give us people to help us. Lord, we want to be your ambassadors. We want to be sensitive, and we want to be educated in all things culture. Teach us, Lord, how to go into these different phases and to be fruitful and to, Lord, truly, see your Spirit move in the lives of millions of people through our feeble lives. We love you, Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Oh, okay. Don't make fun of